Hello and welcome to today's SIG CLI KRM Functions subproject meeting. Today is Wednesday, May 4th, and my name is Katrina Veery. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be your host for today. So before we get started with the topics, do we have any introductions today? Anyone who would like to introduce themselves to the group?
My name is Holden O'Neill. I'm a software developer at SAS Institute, and I'm interested in learning more about the KRM functions. I've been using Kustomize for a couple of years now, as well as Kubernetes and things like that. So just here to try to learn a little bit more and maybe contribute something back.
Awesome. Welcome. So we only have one topic here today. Munchie, would you like to present your proposal?
Sure. It seems I don't have permission to present.
Right. Here we go. Try again now.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Great. So this one. Okay. So this one is a proposal about adding something new into the KRM function spec to support running it as a server, run it as a server. So the motivation here is that currently in when we evaluate a KRM functions, we roughly have this 6 step. So we spin up the runtime. So it can be either exec or container currently. And then next step is do some pre-processing, like fetching something from network or parsing a schema, something like that. And then the third step is read the resource list from standard in, and then mutate or validate that. And then after that, write the updated resource list to standard out, and then shut down the runtime. So from our experience at Google, we feel that so the step 1 and the step 2 and the step 6. So if we so these steps can take more time than the actually real evaluation step, which is from step 3 to step 5. So for example, if we are using the container as runtime and spinning it up, it may take a few seconds. And also something like if we fetching a schema from network, and if it's big, it can take half second or longer. And similarly for passing the schema. So if we can avoid repeating step 1, step 2, and step 6, we only do step 3 to step 5, then we can have a better performance in terms of evaluating KRM functions. So then the idea comes from here. So in spec v2, so I'm proposing that supporting running KRM function as server so that we can spin it up once and do the pre-processing once, and then we can keep evaluating functions and for many different resource lists. And so we don't plan to change to the resource list itself, but we need to change to the function metadata schema to indicate that what version, what spec version this functions conforms with. So this, we're introducing a new field here. So here is a sample of KRM function metadata schema. So the current definition of the schema can be found here. So it's in a cap, yeah, another cap. Okay. So this is a new field that it's a list of the spec versions it conform with. So can be multiple value. And then dive into more details. We can support two flavors of server. So the first one, it can be a HTTP server, and it can accept JSON or YAML, and it can also return YAML or JSON in the response. So currently, what we support in spec v1 is it always YAML. And also, so this HTTP server need to support a flag as part, a flag or environment variable as part of the spec, so that when someone or some tools need to invoke that, it knows what's the flag to use. And yeah, similarly for the GRPC server. So the protobuf definition, so it's being worked on. So I haven't finished it yet. So because in our function spec, we have a field called items, and also function spec. It can be any KRM resource. So we need to have a generic way to represent them. So I'm still working on this. So I'm expecting to update this by the end of week. And then jumping into the user story. So as an end user of KRM functions, so I can reference the function metadata schema to find out if it's implement spec v2 or both v1 and v2. We can the user can find it from the KRM function registry eventually when the users when the developers publish their functions and their function metadata there. And the second user story is that, so as a orchestration tool developer, so I can develop tools work with both spec v1 and v2. And so the tool can choose to the tools can choose to if reuse a KRM function runtime or not, depending on its need. And third story is as a KRM function developer, I can implement my functions to conform spec v2 or both v1 and v2, and then publish to the registry and for end users to consume it. And if it's a container-based functions, the function metadata can also be saved into OCI annotations. So when a users fetch an image, it's more self-contained. The user have the image and then can read the metadata from the OCI image, and then the user get everything he or she need. Then scalability. So this proposal is intended to help the performance. So with the same amount of CPU and memory resource and given same time, it can evaluate more KRM functions. And the one, so at least it's in the drawback sections, but it doesn't necessarily be the drawback. So these proposals can helps when a user want to have the demand to reuse the same functions, but it doesn't help the users that only do like one-off operations. So this more like it can help when, for example, a platform team in an enterprise want to build some tooling to manage their KRM resource. This server mode can be helpful because they may evaluate same functions on behalf of different users repeatedly, and it will help the performance. And then the alternatives. So currently in the spec v2 above, it is a superset of spec v1. That means it support both the old way, which is spin up runtime and evaluate and shut down, and the server mode. But we can actually also make it to be the two spec to be disjoint. Means v1 and v2 doesn't have overlappings, and that's one of the option. Another alternative is that, so in the we extend from the what the current format is. So in the input, we can accept multiple resource list separated by dash dash dash, and in the output we do the same. Write one resource list out and then add a dash dash dash, and then the next one. Something similar to the server mode is that, so these KRM functions, after evaluating one resource list, it stay there, wait for the next one until see the next resource list, and with 3-. And then about this rollout plan is we can first make this with like in our schema, we can first make it v1 alpha 1 along with another proposed change by another proposed change, which is proposing changing proposed value to proposed values. And we do it in v2 alpha 1 and give it some time, and then we can do v2 beta 1 and then eventually graduate to v2. Yeah, so that's an overview of this proposal. Any questions?
I have a lot of questions, but I'll let somebody else go first. Unless there aren't any others.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So my first question is, why is it a V2 and what is it a V2 of exactly? Because it sounds like we're not actually incrementing the resource version on any of the associated types. Like resource list isn't changing, function, what is it called? Function metadata, I guess. The kind isn't showing on the example, but whatever the kind is for that resource isn't actually getting a new group version. So why is this a V2 instead of a new feature that we can add, given that's backwards compatible?
So it's I think it can be made backward compatible, but in my opinion, it's I feel the server mode is significantly different from what we currently have. So it may make sense to make it V2, but I'm open to this.
I guess it is also related to my next observation comment, which is that V2 versus V1, like V2, if we were implementing it as a superset, then V2, server mode is optional in V2 and not existent in V1. So perhaps a more useful distinction would be just have explicitly say, declaratively server mode supported, true, false. Because if you say conforms with spec version V2, well, if server mode is optional in V2, then you are conformant with V2 even though you don't support server mode, right? And as you point out toward the end of your document there, I don't think this mode is going to be approachable enough to be universally adopted because it has a lot more requirements than the original, both on the developer side and on the fact that you just have to have infrastructure running in the background for it to work. So I think we would need to retain that as, retain the original mode in V2 and make it optional. So we'll need that further specification, whether or not we bump the version.
Okay, I see. So it's kind of a feature gate and a feature flag. We can we can put it in the function metadata schema, probably with a different name here.
Yeah, exactly. So it would be
optional.
Like V1 alpha 1 server support or something would be the flag instead.
Oh, you said V1 alpha 1 server support?
Oh, I don't know if you were talking about wanting to version the feature and put it through alpha, so you could put the word alpha into the field as well if you still wanted to do that, right? So you could have an alpha field, alpha server support, whatever you want, true, and then when you graduate it, they would just change the field to server support true. Obviously not that exact name, I'm just throwing it out there. But
yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I have another one that's very related to this field question as well. but it kind of ties into my biggest question about the whole thing, which is on the question of trust. So we have a lot of different actors. This actually introduces even more actors than any previous scenario that we have described in our other KEPs. If I'm counting correctly, we have up to 5. So you have the end user, who is, they may not have written their customization or KEP file themselves. They just want to use it. So end user inflating a manifest, let's say, they may or may not be using catalogs. So there are 2 kind of sub scenarios in there. Then you have the manifest author, who may or may not be the same person, who again may or may not also author a catalog, 2 sub scenarios. Then you have the function author, which you've addressed. And you have the orchestrator author, so like kept or customize. And then you have the function server host now as a 5th. So something I'd really like to see in the proposal is more detail in all of the stories and in some of the technical design places as well about who is owning the trust for like, and what expressing that trust in the other parties looks like from these various stories perspective. So if I'm an end user inflating a manifest, what trust do I need to explicitly express in the manifest author, the function author, the orchestrator author, and the function server host? Some of that's implicit, obviously. I run kept, obviously I trust kept, that's good enough. But like with catalog, we have some additional trust mechanisms in there, but there's nothing for the function server host in particular for their relationship with any of these other parties. So that's something I'd like to see a lot more detail on. And going back to the field, one of the places where that comes up in the technical design is that a Boolean probably isn't sufficient because of that trust question. Like maybe that it supports, the function supports being run in server mode, but there's a couple users, a couple different parties in between the end user who's actually doing the invocation and the function author who added the support, because the fact that it can theoretically be run that way doesn't mean that there's a particular server running somewhere that I can use and that I trust that server. So the missing pieces in my mind there are like, how do I know where that server actually is as the orchestrator author and as the end user? And as the end user in particular, well, I guess, or the orchestrator author, how do I express my trust in that particular function server?
Yeah, I will add more details discussing this.
If you had any thoughts to share on that topic, we could also discuss now. We still have plenty of time. That's my big question is about those relationships and how to express them in a way that will be good enough for security.
Yeah, I think in that scenario that the server host is responsible for establishing this trust and also curated carefully pick the functions they run as server because when they run this KRM function as servers, that means they trust these functions and also they provide a service for their KRM function end users because these end users doesn't really run these functions. The server host actually run it on their behalf.
So you have a trust relationship between the function author and the function server host in that case. And then the end user no longer needs to trust the function directly, they need to trust the server host. Because, for example, some functions require network access because they interface with a secret store. So as the end user, I still need some trust in what the function is going to do with the data that it's pulling. And that, I guess, gets transferred to the function server host, that they're not going to pull it and then ship it off somewhere else, for example. So there still is some relationship there, I think.
Yes, yes. And the server, so the function orchestrator tools and may also support authentications, but I think I think that may complicate our starting point. Maybe we can at the starting point we can restrict this use case to be within one organizations, which means the end user who can access this KRM function evaluation service is in the same organizations, so that the authentications may not be really necessary. So it can simplify our initial starting point setup. And if in the future that we are seeing some user requests about authentication features, we can revisit this part. What do you think?
Actually wasn't even going as far as authentication, just as far as even the selection of the server to execute the function. If you see the manifest, like maybe there's some detail that's just not specified in the design yet, but like if the manifest just says this function supports server side, like running as a server, what does that mean? Like, where is the server? How does it get found? How does that information, like, where does the information about that come from? And how does the end user say, like, yeah, that's what I meant to do? Particularly in the case where the function actually says it supports multiple modes, like it says it supports exec and container and server. How does that selection happen of a specific server that actually is capable of running that specific function?
So I imagine that it that is solved by the orchestration tools. So the tools can run the KRM functions in both server mode or the standard mode. And the tools also provide the end user maybe some kind of a client, and then this client tool can talk to the orchestration tools, and they know they can give the client information where the KRM function server is. Yeah, an alternative is they can the orchestration tool can even be a kind of dispatcher. So the client tool is just always sent to the orchestration tools, and the orchestration tool dispatch to the right KRM function server running by this tool. That's another option.
So in the concrete case that you have, let's say talking about kept and Google as the server host, would you then hard code in a given distribution of kept the address for Google's server host? Or how is that information getting in there still, even if the orchestration tool is the one doing the selection?
So the current use case we in our mind is that we imagine that this orchestration tools and also the KRM functions servers can are run in the same Kubernetes cluster, and so it's happens in the same clusters. It's not it's not like Google provide a hosted service, like an official hosted service somewhere for the KRM functions, and the tools will make requests to that service out of its clusters it's running. So currently, we are thinking that happens in the same cluster.
So you have kept as a service as well. It's not a command line, like it's not a user at their own command line that would be benefiting from this feature.
Yeah, yeah, you can imagine that it's something similar to that.
Okay, because that would be an even more narrow set of beneficiaries if that's all we're targeting to support, right? Whereas the spec is intended to really support all users of the tools that are compliant. So any kept user and any customized user, right? So I feel like we should have a way for me as an end user to say that I'm running this function in my own fleet over here and get the benefit as well. Otherwise, the benefit is just so narrow.
You mean like provide a discovery mechanism, or probably cache the endpoint somewhere for the tool so that they can access that?
It's just some way for the feature to be used in an environment that's not 100% hosted, like the one you're talking about, because I don't think that describes the vast majority of our users. And the performance problem that you're addressing with this is real and it's interesting. And like if you have a user who's not using your hosted kept service, but they are a customer and they used kept, and you're already hosting those functions that they need, like it'd be great if they could use them too and get the benefits, right? And like how does the discovery work? I don't know. If you were to use the orchestrator approach, like you were saying, maybe the orchestrator needs to have a flag that says, you know, function server host here. And then you'd probably still need like a series of fallbacks because you don't know which functions the host supports. You could potentially also use catalog for this. It might be a little bit more brittle, but it does theoretically support use cases that are very similar, right? In terms of like, where is the implementation? That's a core feature of what catalog is trying to support, right? So that you can support multiple exec binaries that might be in different places, verify them, and containers. And you could have a runtime environment that is saying like, I prefer containers or I prefer exec or whatever. And then you could tell that to your orchestrator, and your orchestrator can go, oh, they prefer containers. So I'm going to look through my catalog and I'm always going to select container from the available runtimes for the given function. You could do something similar for the server side, almost as an additional runtime. Maybe that's another way to think of it. Where you, instead of having, well, or in addition to having the stanza about container and the one about exec, you would have one about server, function server, and it would have information about where that server is and any potential credential stuff, I guess, like you were saying, might need auth in the future. And then like the catalog is something that can already be baked in, like we already have the option. In theory, it's not implemented, but the design has the option to bake it into an orchestrator so that it would just work like that, automatically support a given server in this case, or for the end user to write one that augments it, and they would have the chance to plug in their own targets, in this case, function servers.
Okay. So one thing I want to clarify, so in our use case, so it's not a Google hosted thing. So the use case we are trying to do is that we provide this orchestration tools to the users, so the user do self-hosting in their cluster. So that means, like, for example, each enterprise can deploy their own orchestration tools in their clusters, and so the KRM function as a service is maintained within that cluster, so it's not shared across different enterprise or things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I will add more details discussing the perspective you mentioned. Yeah, I think that's worth more discussion in the proposal.
Thanks. And if you could add some examples of what the configuration, because we're talking about config management tools when it comes down to it, what the configuration actually looks like for each one of the stories, I think that would be super helpful to understanding the user experience for all these various parties.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions from other folks?
All right, if there's nothing else, then thank you everyone for attending. I think that was our only topic still for today. Yep, nothing new has been added to the agenda. So please, if you are here today, please add your name to the attendees list. And thank you very much for coming. Our next meeting will be 2 weeks from today.
Hey, Joe.
Have a great day.